Now, throughout the spring and summer here in France, there are multiple festivals and events that pay tribute to the Middle Ages. Now, for more on this, we can bring in Solange Mougin. Solange, why is there such a fascination for medieval times in this country?
Well, the rich history of the Middle Ages, it is all around us here in France. From one of its jewels, the Notre-Dame Cathedral here in Paris, to fortified cities like Carcassonne, the Mont Saint-Michel, to pop culture with things like Monty Python, to France's many festivals. All of this contributes to fortifying our interest in the roughly around 1,000-year period, which is the Middle Ages. Now, this is a vast period and a vast history with so many fascinating angles. But for today, I thought we'd focus purely on reenactment events, where thousands gather every year to relive history, or to dress up and pretend that they're living 900 years ago. And one of the main ones, one of the biggest in Europe, if not the biggest in Europe, is just outside Paris, in the UNESCO heritage city of Provins. Every year, over 100,000 people gather there in June to celebrate and to watch over 700 costume participants do things like jousting like knights, forging metal, dancing in unison, and thereby tapping collectively into joyous but also potentially demonic fantasies about this era.
The goal is to feel like we're in the Middle Ages. There are the costumes, the decor. People really feel like they're in a medieval atmosphere, like the ones you've found in the 12th and the 13th centuries, when we had our famous fairs in Provins.
Being able to get together to experience a somewhat fantastical historical world does us good.
It's true that being in a medieval village with the Caesar Tower right there and having an entire town center participating in the celebrations, it's really great.
And this year's edition, the 40th Médiévale of Provins, is this coming weekend on June 14th and 15th. So if you want to learn about France's history, but also debunk some of the myths about the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, all the while folk dancing, it could be a good place to start. Even beyond the dates of this festival, the UNESCO city holds shows and events throughout the summer to speak to tourist fascination with this era.
But Solange, is more than just what's happening in Provins, right?
Yeah, of course. There are festivals across the country and all year round in France. These médiévales, as they're often called in French, are held in places like Bagnols-sur-Cèze, Guérande, Sedan, to name just a few. And then, of course, there are also others abroad, in English and in England and in other nations. These are often called Ren fairs or Renaissance fairs, and they are often reenactments of sort of a hodgepodge of different historical eras. And people really get into this. It's almost weird in its purposefully out-of-this-world atmosphere. But researchers say that these reenactments, well, they serve a modern-day purpose for people, adults and children alike. Not only do they teach history in a potentially more palatable way, they also, like sort of classic stories like the King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, well, they create a communal shared cultural heritage and therefore potentially values. They also create empathy over the hardships of the past that may not necessarily be hugely different from hardships of today. There's also a sense of community as well as expressions of emotion, say anger during a knight's battle, but in a safer, a potentially palatable framework.
I think this is better than a history book. It speaks to me more, but I still find it very violent. Very, very violent. I hope they don't repeat it at home.
Want to do what you just saw?
Not really. I don't want people to hit each other and stuff like that.
Yes,
Why?
because I like fighting.
Who would you fight?
Knights.
Now, Solange, besides, beyond festivals rather, amusement parks also seem to draw crowds with historical reenactments.
Yeah, of course there's Disney with its fantasy world and Asterix with its tribute to Gaullism and the comics series. And the number 3 park, d'attraction as they're called in French, or amusement park in France is Le Puy du Fou. And here, history, whether accurate and truthful or not, is the main calling card. Half of the park's villages depict the Middle Ages, with one on the 10th century and the other on the 13th century. And some 2.8 million people visited it in 2024. It is well-loved entertainment. But it isn't without its problems. Historians have called out a lot of sort of false depictions and cliches at the Puy du Fou. They say it pushes a false history and also potentially far-right ideologies. For the park was founded by the far-right sovereigntist politician Philippe de Villiers. So visitors at Puy du Fou need to take this into account while learning about medieval history while there. But beyond this important political element, its popularity in France, but also elsewhere in Europe, well, there is a Puy du Fou in Spain. It's the second most visited park in Spain. There's also one in the works, potentially in the UK. Well, all of these amusement parks, well, they show people's interest in learning about history in an immersive and also entertaining way.
Solange, thank you very much for that, Solange Mougin.